We have the MTGO data concerning tens of thousands of Cultic and Dekkaru cube decks. Let's learn what the cube drafter might get out of this rich vein of raw material. Welcome to Cultic Cube, where we cube religiously. We make you better at cube, and make your cube better. This video is part 3 in our series that analyzes the results of our great MTGO cube experiment. If you haven't yet seen the first 2 parts, I recommend getting up to speed on those before returning to this one. Today I have the pleasure of introducing my friend and colleague Parker, aka landofMordor, who helms this section of analysis. Parker synthesizes the 2 large datasets with the aim of translating raw numbers into insights applicable to the draft experience.
Thanks, John. These datasets provide a rare opportunity to level up our draft skills informed by quantitative knowledge. We won't be able to draw objectively correct inferences given the nature of these data, but we'll use our common sense and our magic experience to derive some responsible insights into the draft process. I'll begin with one of the first level ups in my limited magic life, drafting the hard way. The essence of this ethos is that one must be willing to abandon powerful Pack 1 picks in order to stay open, reaping the benefits of an open lane in later packs. Prevailing wisdom is that one should be willing to abandon the Pack 1 pick 1 in as many as 40% of one's drafts. The average Magic player, though, doesn't pivot often enough. They're only 20 or 30% likely to do so in a retail draft set like Throne of Eldraine, as collaborator Ryan Saxe has demonstrated. So, naturally I was interested. In Cube, a vastly more powerful format, how likely was a drafter to abandon their Pack 1 pick 1 to pivot into an open lane? Our data won't answer this question exactly, but there are ways we can converge on an answer. Here we see a high correlation between how desirable a card was in draft and its likelihood to be main decked. Cards with a high pick rank are likely to be main decked and vice versa. This makes sense with what we know of the draft process. We snap up the cards we're excited to play immediately, and we try to avoid drafting chaff or situational cards early. But let's combine this graph with insights learned from drafting the hard way. High pick rank cards like Jace the Mind Sculptor or Oko Thief of Crowns were 94% likely to be main decked in the Cultic Cube. The trend is similar for the Dekkaru Cube, where high pick rank cards like Primeval Titan and Consecrated Sphinx were 91% likely to show up in the main deck. It isn't until we get to mid-pack material, 6th picks or so, in either cube, cards like Banalish Marshal, Power Sink, Dismember, or Pack Rat, that the likelihood of main decking the pick drops below 80%. Our data simply won't allow an exact study of whether a given Pack 1 pick 1 was main decked. But we can safely advise the listener that it is probably not optimal draft strategy to first pick Jace and then be 94% likely to commit to blue based off that single pick. Blue might not be open, and even if it is, the final deck might lean more toward tempo or mid-range, where playing Jace might be less desirable. In other words, it is okay to first pick power outliers like Jace or Primetime, but even in Cube, staying open and drafting the hard way will pay dividends. Before we move on from this graph, notice the small number of outliers. Colleague Gwen Dekker contributed some crucial analysis of sideboard cards to our brainstorming, and it got me thinking, do these outliers represent sideboard cards or a different kind of card? To get at this idea in the data, I introduced a mathematically convenient number, which I'll call flexibility index. It allows me to normalize a card's likelihood to be main decked by its pick ranking. I defined the flexibility index such that cards with a high index were main decked higher than their pick rank might suggest. Cards with a low index are cards picked highly but sidelined often. The top 11 flexibility cards in the Dekkaru Cube and 7 out of the Cultic Cube's top 11 were lands. That is entirely unsurprising to me. Lands may not be as flashy as a Planeswalker, but they have an incredibly low deck building cost. I also noticed some gold cards which, in my experience, tend to wheel until they reach the drafter in those colors. Izzet Charm or Thought Erasure, for example. Yes, blue-red decks will almost always play Izzet Charm, but it's not so much better than Negate that it will get picked early. These gold cards reward drafters for being in a gold deck, but they do not provide a reason to go gold in the first place. Finally, I see some C-tier support effects like Ransack the Lab, Anticipate, Worldly Tutor, and Opt, which, despite not setting any records for efficiency, they do align very well with the game plan of their respective decks. Many of these effects are critical mass effects. For example, the Xerox theory suggests that for every 3 cheap cantrips, one can safely trim a land from a limited deck. It doesn't matter how good the cantrips are. Opt is mediocre compared to Preordain. What matters is that one can cantrip reliably. The same goes for all-in combo, like the Cultic Cube's creature cheat deck. The difference in rate between Titanoth Rex or Gristlebrand is much less important than the consistency of the combo. Conversely, the card shared by both cubes with the lowest flexibility index was Sorceress Spyglass, the ultimate sideboard card. It makes sense. Other sideboard cards like Fragmentize and Nature's Chant joined it in the bottom quartile, but so did parasitic synergy pieces like Through the Breach, Smallpox, or Intuition. Now, there's something to be said for speculative synergy picks. If Through the Breach goes late, it may be a signal that the creature cheat deck is open. But midway through Pack 1, a humble fixing land may be a safer pick that is more likely to be played to the benefit of its pilot. So far, I've only commented on the flexibility of given cards, not those cards' power. I conducted an analogous study of match wins normalized by pick ranking, again using a mathematically convenient number which I'll call sleeper index this time. Cards with a high sleeper index gave their pilots more match wins than their pick ranking might suggest, their sleeper hits. If a card has a low sleeper index, it more or less deserves its pick ranking, whether high or low. Cards with high sleeper indices in both cubes were somewhat surprising. Mostly these cards were aggro pieces: Silverflame Squire, Volshuk Morningstar, Heirloom Blade, Jackal Pup, Gingerbrute, for example. Now, this part of the results makes sense because we know from John and Gwen's breakdown in videos 1 and 2 that aggro, a critical mass strategy, performed very well in both cubes. Red and white aggro decks thrive, in fact, when apparently bad 1-drops like Gingerbrute or Jackal Pups wheel directly into that drafter's gleeful hands, because 1-drops are crucial for executing the aggro game plan consistently. The other subset of cards with high sleeper indices were some assorted synergy pieces: Goblin Welder, Sylvan Tutor, Kuldotha Forgemaster, and the like. Again, this makes relative sense. The combos these cards support are critical mass-based, highly build-around, and highly parasitic. You'd be crazy to main deck Goblin Welder or Jackal Pup in a draw-go control deck or a green-based mid-range deck. So, our MTG intuition suggests that high sleeper index cards were somewhat self-selecting. If a card wheels to me, I'll only main deck it if it matches my deck's plan. Critical mass strategies like aggro and combo live and die by the number of relevant effects more than the quality of any one effect. And so, the high archetype win rates for these critical mass strategies, especially aggro, artificially inflates the sleeper index of the constituent cards. Now, that's a lot of words that don't mean much data-wise, so sleeper index was a bit of a bust in terms of data mining. But the groupings of cards we saw through our study of sleeper index do suggest the strategic value of achieving critical mass while drafting towards a particular deck strategy in these cubes. Critical mass decks are those which emphasize quantity over quality. This includes all synergy-based A+B combos, as well as combo and aggro. So, for example, when drafting combo in cubes like the Dekkaru cube or the Cultic Cube, a redundant combo piece might be more valuable even than a top-tier planeswalker or other threat. A side benefit of this draft strategy is that it stakes one's claim in an archetype. If one picks Soul Herder over God Eternal Kefnet in the Dekkaru cube, one might lose out on power for this single pick, but staking that claim on Blink may pay off later if Blink's critical mass pieces wheel. The risk one takes, of course, is that the power level of the format's best Blink deck may not equal the power of a mediocre, card quality focused blue control deck that's chock full of bombs, ignoring synergy. Unfortunately, the so-called correct drafting strategy between narrow and flexible cards can't be proven by our data, and it likely changes from draft to draft. But this very uncertainty is one thing which makes Limited so fun. This whole idea of critical mass is a slightly shifted draft heuristic from either retail limited or typical Magic Online cubes. In either of those environments, it is almost always correct to ignore synergy or redundancy if one can pick a format-defining bomb like Packrat in Return to Ravnica, or Sundering Stroke in Eldraine, or Mox Ruby in Vintage Cube. In Retail Limited, it can even be correct to pick premium removal like Bake Into a Pie over synergy pieces like Trail of Crumbs, or to pick up another subpar creature like Garenbrig's Squire just to avoid falling behind in board stalls. In unpowered cubes like the Dekkaru and Cultic Cubes, though, the worst removal spell is not much worse than the best. And, importantly, removal and interaction both are plentiful. Moreover, although Oko is maybe still the best Planeswalker ever printed, Oko is not so much better than Mu Yanling's Skydancer or Nissa Voice of Zendikar as to be irreplaceable. The irreplaceable effect in cubes like these, counterintuitively, is often the Goblin Welders or Grafted Wargears that make critical mass decks like aggro and combo tick, or the density of Llanowar Elves and Preordains that enable card quality archetypes like midrange and control to develop their resources and leverage their superior cards.
If you'll permit me to interrupt Parker for a commercial break, I'd like to remind you that Cultic Cube is supported via Patreon. Come join the conversation in our community of Cube connoisseur. You can also support the channel by making purchases via my affiliate links in the video description for TCG Player, Inked Gaming, and Amazon. Thanks.
The obvious caveat concerning critical mass is that each cube is its own microcosm, and the conclusions we draw from Dekkaru and Cultic may not apply to other environments. In fact, even claiming definite conclusions about these environments must be done carefully, informed by good Magic common sense, as the data available are far from complete. But, in the interest of leveling up our draft skills, we can hypothesize that, based on our studies of pick ranking, main deck ability, flexibility, and underratedness, unpowered cubes like the Dekkaru and Cultic cubes reward drafters who are willing to abandon powerful Pack 1 Pick 1s in favor of building a deck with robust mana fixing, consistent critical mass components, and efficient card quality finishers. In other words, fortune favors the drafter who is able to transform their 45 draft picks into a single, coherent, focused deck. Thanks for coming on this data-fueled journey with me today. Many thanks to John and Gwen for their sponsorship of the project, and a special shout out to Ryan Saxe and Jett Crowdis for their technical expertise. You can find me on Cube subreddits or Discords as landofMordor. Happy cubing.
Thank you so much, Parker. Join us next time as Jett takes the helm in synthesizing our data to help the Cube designer. Let's keep hanging out and chatting Cube.